is ended. The Atari 8-bit podcast.
I had these guys that were in a barn that was built in 1100 something that had set it up to be their, quote, office somewhere in northern England in the middle of nowhere. And they had come up with a baseball cap that you'd put on and you could move the cursor with your eyes.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Steve Gerber was head of the Atari Software Acquisition Program. In October 1981, Atari opened its first regional software acquisition center, which was managed by Steve in a 4,000 square foot location that also housed the Atari Program Exchange. Later, Steve was Atari's Vice President of International New Product Development, in charge of software development for non-US markets. This interview took place on January 17, 2017.
Did you actually use Atari computers or anything?
Yeah, I still have my original Atari 800 on my desk behind me.
Oh my gosh. Well, then I'm sorry for you because at one point before we moved into our new house, I had when the whole thing shut down, I'm sure people have told you this, I can't think of his name, but the Commodore guy that came in with his sons to fire all but about 3 people.
Yeah, Jack Tramiel.
When that happened, they basically said, everybody get out, take what you want. And so in my office, because I used to give away Atari 800s with the disk drives and all the other paraphernalia to developers, I just took all that stuff, threw it in the car, and I for years had brand new boxed everything sitting in my garage.
Wow.
And so whenever I'd run into anybody that was an acolyte and remembering their youth or old days, I'd give them a full set of stuff. And then finally I had a guy call me. Some guy had an Atari store down in like Santa Clara or Sunnyvale. And so he called me. I said, yeah, I got all this stuff. And I had young kids at the time. And I don't know if you remember the Lynx, but the Lynx handheld device had come out.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I just traded him everything I had for a couple of full sets of Lynx stuff. But then I saw what these things are selling for. Jesus, I should have saved them all. They're like good antiques.
So I'd like to start before the beginning, before you got hired by Atari, kind of set me up with your prehistory, any education, whether you're into computers before you got hired. Just kind of tell me the pre-story, if you would.
Oh, okay. Well, Montgomery Ward put me through college in Chicago, and I have 2 degrees in accounting, and when I got out of college, econ and accounting, and got out of college and went to work for them as a retail store controller, and did that job for maybe 6 months, and this new thing called big computing was coming into retail, and they had hired away Sears's, I think his name was Pickett, the CIO or VPIT from Sears, was building an organization, and they just had a bunch of, back in those days, going way back, they had a bunch of Army guys that were doing the programming, and nobody knew the stores. And so they picked 3 people to take out of the stores. And since I had grown up in the store since I was 15, I was one of the 3. And then, so after I got out of grad school, they did this controller thing. They then sent me to 6 months of IBM classes all over the United States and put me in IT. Sent me to Texas to work with National Cash Register on the first ever point of sale accounting, point of sale accounting transactional system for the stores. Left them and stayed in IT the rest of my life. Went to Kaufman, went to 7-Eleven in Texas, did a trucking project. Then I went to Kaufman and Broad, did their national accounting system. And then I went into the apparel industry and I was VP IT. Oh no, before Apparel, I was 2 years Motel 6. There, head of IT, and then I went into apparel manufacturing. Did 3 manufacturers. The third one being in San Francisco, which brought me north. I was only on that job a few months when I got a call to go in and interview at Atari, and so that's what brought me to Atari.
Okay, so you were headhunted in or something?
I'm sorry.
You said you got a call for Atari. Were you headhunted in, or?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
I was. Well, actually, a guy named Bobby Singer. He was with Intel, and we were friends. And he worked with guys. He knew guys at Atari, and he told them they should come get me. And I went and interviewed with Roger Battershire. He had 2 jobs available. One was head of, it was a sales administrative job because he was building the home computer department. And the other was working on the development side with Bruce Irvine. and Bruce is just a great guy. Not that I didn't like Roger, but I didn't want to be on the sales side. I love development, software development, and so I took the job under Bruce. The problem was, and I think Fred was the guy that started it all, they realized within Atari, they only had about 15 or 20 titles, and Commodore had 1,000. And they knew internally they could never build enough titles.
Right.
And so they wanted to build an outside development organization to generate more titles. And so they basically, under Bruce, I had the mandate to go find people to build outside products for us. For example, like Kix, if you remember Kix, which is my all-time favorite game.
Yeah.
I got the one of the F-16 young programming groups that worked on heads-up displays down in LA to build Kix, and then I cut deals with Broderbund, the young guys that founded Broderbund, and Sierra Online, and all these different organizations. So basically, I was cutting deals with outside groups to build out our product set. The plan was to try and get 500 titles into the market in under 24 months, which we beat.
You beat that, wow. So what year were you hired? 1981 or
I
so?
think I was hired in either 80 or 81.
Okay. And what was your title at that point when you first got there?
I think I was a director of product development, but I honestly don't have my cards.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact title. But I worked for Bruce.
Okay, worked for Bruce. And so you're cutting all these deals to get software. Was it just getting software made for the Atari, or was it get it published by Atari under the Atari brand? What was the goal?
Published by Atari. First, it was to be a Atari cartridge product, and then I also got involved with licensing. Like I worked with Fred Simon at Disney to get us the Disney titles, and Jamie Cook was the general counsel, and Jamie was great to work with, and so Jamie would get involved as we found titles that we wanted to buy, and so I did the Disney deal with Fred Simon, who I then convinced management that they should bring in as VP of sales for the home computer group, because he was just a outgoing, brilliant sales guy, and he was a Disney guy down in LA.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh no, it was the world's greatest job. And then it just got better because then Tony Brule quasi bought me away to send me to Europe to try and do a similar thing in Europe. So I built a team. Let me explain the process. So Irene Chen, who was my secretary and who later was head of, went over to Apple. All these people did fabulous, by the way. She went over to Apple to head up their documentation group, and Dave Welch was a really young, insanely smart kid who I don't even think he was 22 yet. He was like into Atari from the day they did their first one. He was came on board as kind of my techie geek guy, and he left us to invent a new camshaft and program so you could take your Corvette or whatever and up the horsepower of it. And he and another Atari guy went off and did that, and they sold that to some big company. We just had so many smart people at the company, so they let me go and build my own building down there in Sunnyvale, or rehab a building down there, and bring in people. And what I did was I hired away systems engineers from like Wang and some of the other companies to end up being our product development guys who actually brought the products all the way through the process. So like Monty Finneyfrock, who went over to Electronic Arts and now is very well retired. He was one of the guys that came aboard, and just terrific, smart people.
Nice. So, I mean, was it mostly games, or were you also looking for productivity applications and that sort of thing? What was the focus?
We did mostly games. I would say 90% games, and then we tried to do a couple of educational products. None of them really did well, but like, I'll give you an example, like Centipede is my favorite story. Mm-hmm. Some lady sent me Centipede. She was an engineer at Ford, and she had an Atari and programmed Centipede and sent it to the company, and obviously it became huge. And,
wow.
Stuff like that.
Huh. It was just set unsolicited from the
stuff
outside
would come
world?
in every day. I mean, it was just people would mail us. People that had their little Ataris and were geeks. When it was not that dissimilar to the apps that are being built today in everybody's house, and so they had their Atari and they figured out how to program it, and people would write stuff and send it in. There was one Caverns of Mars. Mm-hmm. A guy sent that in.
Greg Christensen.
Young kid. I mean, he was paid for his college education. And then we spun off what became Atari Soft. That did okay. It wasn't fabulous, but it was home. Caverns of Mars was under that label, and it was kind of home built stuff. We could sell at a cheaper price.
Right. I think you're thinking of Atari Program Exchange.
Yeah, that's what it ended up being called.
Yeah. Atari Soft was Atari making software for other platforms, like the Commodore or the TI.
No, this was Atari Program Exchange. Yeah. You're right.
So I always kind of assumed that the Atari Software Acquisition Program was the predecessor to Atari Program Exchange. Seems like that's accurate, huh?
Yeah, very.
All right, so you're bringing in all the software, and that must have been very exciting.
Yeah, we had people building it all over the country and within other development organizations. You know, we gave Broderbund their early seed money and stuff like that to build stuff for us.
Neat. All right, so tell me what happened with the international new product development. How did that come up, and what did you do? Where did you go?
I went off to England for about a year, and this is right near to the end because the company went under while I was in England at the end of my stint. But I set up development. So I was based out of the UK, and then I spent my time going to, I think, 7 countries and working with the Atari sales organizations there to bring in mini development teams who would come up with local software. And then while I was in the UK, when I first went there, we would travel to obscure corners of England when people would send us. I mean, if you think about it, that far was pretty amazing. Like I had these guys that were in a barn that was built in 1100 something, that had set it up to be their, quote, office somewhere in northern England in the middle of nowhere. And they had come up with essentially a baseball cap that you'd put on, and you could move the cursor with your eyes. Now, all that stuff, today seems like horse and buggy, but back then it was amazing. Now, we never bought their product because it was the lag time was too slow. But just the fact that people were doing this stuff with the Atari was amazing.
That's really cool. What other kind of?
There were tons of these.
Tell me more. I mean, I could just sit here all day and hear you talk about things you saw.
Yeah, I wish my memory was better, but I apologize. Long time ago, most of them were just kind of simple games but they were country specific. And then we did all the packaging and put it all together, which was horrendous working in Europe before the EU, to put the packaging to get them out into the market together. But it never really had the time to gel and take off as the core products did.
Sure. So what were you looking for in country specific games? Can you give me an example or two?
Well, number one, in the home country language, because back then, if you could not, like today, all the software we build, I own a software company, all the software we build is multilingual. It's very easy to just have multilingual capability in any product you put out today. Back then, it was unheard of. So in Italy, we were building stuff where somebody popped it in and opened the screen. It was in Italian. In German, it was in German. And then we were doing the same thing we did here. Those offices were getting mailed in titles. Once we advertised a little bit, people were sending in titles, and I kind of didn't deal at the ground level at that point. I was so busy trying to establish these different groups in each of the countries. And then I had this guy, Yves Grapin, who I'm still friends with, and he was a Swiss engineer, and he spoke almost every language of all these different countries, and so he came aboard to be number two, and then he would go with me because I back then only spoke English, and so he would come with me to be translator as we would talk to different organizations. For example, Club Med, I had this idea that maybe we should see if we can get Atari products into Club Meds around the world. And so I call up Club Med, and it turns out that they were like a bunch of Atariites over there for some reason in France. And so the number two guy at Club Med invites me to Paris to go out with him for an evening and talk about putting Ataris in the clubs, and so even I popped over and talked to him, and then he invited me to travel to the Club Meds with him and get the feel of what being at a Club Med is like. He was incredibly French, and since I had just had a new baby, that I said, I can't go, but Eve is still thanking me for the trip of a lifetime when he traveled to all these clubs with the Club Med guy.
Wow. So I know that Atari did the Club Med project as an experiment at one location. Were you involved with that?
That came under us, yes.
Yeah.
But Eve handled it.
Oh,
I didn't. That came under us.
Yeah. So I'm interested in that. It's just an incredibly interesting experiment to me. And can you tell me more about it? I mean, obviously it was a failure, but was there anything that you learned from it? Was there anything that was surprising or successful about it?
It was a failure because we bumped into the demise of the company. So this all happened within the last 6 months of the company going under. so we never had a capability of doing proper auditing and looking at how to fix it, make it better. Everybody was kind of getting ready to be dismantled, and so we didn't really expand it. But I think that they tried to, being French, they wanted it to be more French as opposed to just setting up a game room at the Club Meds, which I think if they would have just taken the approach of putting a bunch of Ataris in a room with a bar, they probably would have been amazingly successful at it. Where they tried to promote it as almost an educational event when you're at Club Med, which makes no sense because nobody's going to Club Med to be educated.
Sure. Yeah.
But we didn't. It was. I think it would have run, and we would have figured it out. The problem was it was end of days.
Yeah. Yeah. You may be interested to know that all of the materials that was produced for that, the educational materials for the computer lab, that's all been recovered and scanned, and it's all available online.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
So,
tell me more stories. What haven't I asked you that I should have?
It was an exciting time. I was there for the boom and the bust. Atari would have. I'm sure you've heard this from other people, but had the Ray. What was Ray's name?
Kassar?
The CEO of the. Yeah, Kassar. Kassar was a friggin' genius, and had Warner had the guy running Warner not been jealous of Kassar's success, and had he renewed Kassar's contract, Atari today might be Apple, honestly. But because he was jealous of Kassar, he let Kassar go. The number of letters that the actual people that understood consumer electronics wrote to the head Warner guys, I know I did, telling them that they needed a consumer electronics person running the entire company or somebody that understood perishable goods, which Kassar understood. Instead, they bring in, so they let Kassar go. And effectively, Warner killed the company because they let Kassar go. They brought in these guys from RJR Tobacco and Toothpaste. We used to call them the tobacco and toothpaste guys, who don't ever deal with perishability. And so they came in and they just built tons and tons of stuff. And of course, chips change every 2 years, and that brought down the company. And it was just a shame to see it happen. But in the Kassar days, I mean, it was just amazing, the stuff that was happening and went on, and everybody was just having a great time. Roger Bhattacharya was a really brilliant marketing guy. I don't know where Roger ended up, but he was a super bright guy, and he built a good team. So it was a fun 4 years. It really was. It was a shame to see it killed.
Yeah.
And my job was effectively for 3 years was to start with an empty building and staff it and get products into the market. So I got to run around the country and, like I said, meet with guys like the CR guys and the Broderbund guys and convince them to build a top product for us. And I got to negotiate with Disney and a zillion other organizations. And
can you tell me some more about meeting the CEOs of those software companies?
Remember, everybody was young.
Yeah. And
really young. And so like Broderbund, they started at the house up in Marin County, and he brought in his brother. I don't remember the names, but he brought in his brother, who was at the time managing the Swedish women's basketball team, I remember, and they were going to get into building titles, and And so we gave him money to do that, and they were working out of his house in Marin, and they got so big at one point the neighbors complained they had to actually move to an office building. I think it's Sierra Online, but we went, and I think he was the Fresno guy with Frogger, and they were living in a hick farm in the middle of nowhere down in Fresno.
I think you're thinking of maybe Ihor Wolosenko.
Yeah, I don't remember names.
That was the Synapse people.
But it was, and so it was just all these interesting personalities, like the group down in LA that was doing military plane stuff to build kicks for me. And one of the interesting stories about kicks is we got to the end of kicks. I remember it was an 8K cartridge. And so they couldn't, when you got to a certain spot in the game, they called me up and they said, Steve, we got the game working. It's beautiful. Everything's fine. But we just don't have enough space in the cart. And there's an event that happens and you got to come down and see it. And so I went down there and we looked at it. And there was this one event that if you did a certain combination of things and you got to a certain level deep into the game froze. And they couldn't fix the freeze because they ran out of space in the cart. But you could make it, play for literally hours and before you hit. So I said, let's put it in the market. This is a great game. Very few people get that far, and let's just put a note in the manual that says if it freezes, you made a mistake, and please just restart your game.
Blame the user. Nice.
Blame the user, and so we put it in the marketplace. And I remember I said to people, never forget that. In later years, when I would tell the story, I'd say, just remember there were something like 3 million bugs in Windows when Gates put it in the market.
Right. So what was this organization that did kicks, this military organization, and they didn't really have a name. They didn't have a name. It was a bunch of guys that worked for the government on the heads-up display for the military planes. Just 20-something guys that loved Atari. Wow.
There were so many little groups around the United States that just were into Atari.
Are there any? So you mentioned kicks a couple of times. Are there any other games that you're particularly proud of or memorable that you brought in? Centipede. Yeah.
Was
and you said that was submitted by someone.
I'm pretty sure it was it's just so friggin' long ago, but I think she was an auto engineer, I believe. But it was the first lady that built a game. And I'm almost certain it was Centipede. It's so friggin' long ago.
Sure.
But this was, we just had stuff coming in. You couldn't keep up with all the stuff that was mailed in, especially when we started the Program Exchange.
Yeah.
And then we would have a annual winner and give a reward, an award to the person with the best game, and then we were also the group that was doing all the packaging and everything for the game. And then out of the blue, I can't remember when Irvine left, but then that was all part of the decline too, because when Bruce moved on, nobody with a tenth of his capability took over after he left. And then we were all gone in, 84 or something?
Yeah,
on the roof.
July 84 is kind of when the stories tend to end. So how did your time come to an end? You were overseas somewhere. How did you find out? What happened?
Yeah, so I was overseas. They brought in the Commodore guys brought in their hatchet guys to just basically let everybody go. A lot of the guys that were overseas got totally screwed. I wouldn't go offshore unless I had a wife and kid, and so they really wanted me to go offshore because I had so successfully done this onshore. And so I said, look, here's the deal. I want a contract, and I want a contract from Warner. I don't want an Atari contract. And so I get a letter handed to me that they're shutting everything down, and I'm fired, and just no notice, stopped, no nothing. So here you are sitting in England. You got a family. They're not going to pay the way back. They're not going to do anything. And some people just got totally screwed.
Yeah.
And so I called up the guy who was the attorney shutting it all down.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, look, I have a contract, and so I'm going to sue you. And he said, there are no contracts. And I said, nope, wrong. I really have a Warner contract. And so I sent him a copy of my contract, and thank heaven I did it, because they lived up to everything in the contract, moved me back home, paid off everything I had, and gave me my I don't know if it was 30 or 60 day check, and that was it. And that was the last time I worked for a real company.
What do you do today?
So I left Atari, and I did consulting for almost 10 years in the Valley, helping, which was my original background, helping large organizations select the software they should use to run their companies, and doing projects for companies like Sun Micro and Apple and people like that. And then in 1992, I met this guy, and I was thinking about starting my own company, and I met this just wonderful guy who had a idea in a teeny little company that he couldn't grow, and that company is Select Quote, which you may or may not have seen advertisements for.
Sure, I've seen ads.
And it's the largest term life direct marketer in America. And I went, I consulted for him for a little while, and then I came in as president of the company, and today Select Quote, and I stayed with Quote from 92 to 03. And we built it, and then I got bought my Atherton house, and started a software company, which I'm running today, which does software for the insurance industry, distribution software for various kinds of insurance.
Very cool.
Yeah, no, it's a good ride. In fact, just starting another one. We never die until we actually die. We entrepreneur guys just never quit. So, yeah, no, and our company's doing well, and so, and I stayed on the Select Quote board for a long time. Quote's getting near $200 million company, so.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. And Sharon Singh, who founded it, is still CEO of the company and a good friend.
If you could send a message...
So that was it. Didn't go back to games.
Yeah. All right. Well, sometimes you just can't go back.
Yeah. Well, it just wasn't. It was a stop on the road. Where Monty Finneyfrock, he left and went to EA and had a great ride. So.
Right. If you could send a message to the Atari computer users that still exist, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Oh, I'd say enjoy it, right? It's just, things have become, I almost wish I had one to put away here for my grandchildren, because everything today has become so complicated. And I was talking to a PhD child psychologist recently, who was talking about the children's use of computers before the age of 3, and during their teenage years is detrimental to the growth of their brains, because everything is just coming at them and it's just overly complicated. And the cool thing about Atari with that simple little joystick and the one little red button was you can have all this fun and it didn't overload your senses. So just enjoy it. It's just such a fun system.
Thank you so much.
You keep doing what you're doing. Fun stuff.
If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.